used to be something that most people didn't want to do,
Right.
because it was like, oh, pick a color. Well, now that you can not pick a color, you can have any color you want. What would be some of the advantages of doing that? And I think there is. I think there adds some depth to the projects. And you see it in the landscape, right? You'll take an outdoor project and you'll put some, you even add color to the green plants so that it's greener than green.
Right.
And then you'll add, a colored light. Maybe it's because of the art in the room, or maybe it's neon, or various things like that. So I think color has been a huge feature of projects going forward, and I think it has to be. It's a circadian thing. All right, so I am here with Chip Israel. We are here at the Design Build Ascend Studios, and we're going to be chatting about all kinds of things, lighting and business related, and I really appreciate you coming within 6 feet and spending some time with us here in the studio. And I'm sure we've got lots to talk about. Our history goes back a couple of years now. I think you remember when we had little ones in little, picking to preschool kind of thing. So
my littlest ones just had a little one, so
and
we're on the next generation.
You're a little ahead of us. We have our oldest is graduating from high school now, so she's on her way to school and some sort of artistic program, hopefully. But I appreciate you coming in and spending some time. What I wanted to start with is sort of getting to know you, and particularly in the things that maybe a lot of people don't talk about, which is just sort of how you grew up, and where you grew up, and then how'd you get into lighting? Because I think everyone's got a unique story on how they get into lighting.
Okay, well, we'll start at the beginning. I was born on an Indian reservation up by Buffalo, New York, which everybody's kind of surprised about, and maybe that's why we designed casinos, even though we're not part of the tribe that is there, or the American First Nationals. But the whole idea is it was a very small rural town, and basically moved just to northeast Philadelphia area and things, which was very, very rural. So our upbringing was pretty straightforward. My grandfather owned a factory that went out of business a couple of times. Because of the economy, and what I learned from him was he actually paid back everyone that he owed money to, even though by the bankruptcy he didn't have to do it. So we've always learned about what is the right thing to do, and we've kind of lived by that. Sometimes we have to make decisions or business decisions that maybe aren't popular, but we always try to do what is right and the good for all type of thing. So that what kind of really affected me early on. Our family, wasn't rich, wasn't poor. We didn't have exotic vacations, but we were a very close family and learned how to work really hard. And I think that's what's really helped us out through our career, and by inspiration even helped our daughters a little bit, because they see how hard that we've worked, and unfortunately we've missed bits and pieces of their childhood because of traveling or whatever.
Yeah.
But it kind of worked together, so it got us to where we are now. The other big step was all through high school, we were really fortunate that we could take drafting classes and architecture classes, which I
remember those.
Yeah, I don't even think they offer them anymore, and that's part of the problem, that kids seem to be funneled into things. You have to learn math, you have to learn science, you have to do this, and they don't get the exposure to all these different options. And this was in the late 70s. Yes, we're that old and things, but articles would come out and say there's no jobs for architecture, and I really wanted to kind of go into architecture. We had done a lot of designs. We were always building things from models to forts to whatever, driving our parents crazy and things. Then it shifted more into automobiles and things. Wanted to go to Penn State, and I was fortunate enough to get into Penn State, and my father's like,
the second best program in architectural engineering.
I know, Colorado's above it. And, John's joking because he's a Jayhawk, because Kelly is our partner. But the great programs around, and that's also, we try to support all of those and the newer ones that are coming up too. But I fell into architectural engineering by accident. I wanted to go there for architecture. My father's like, you have to be an engineer. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I opened up the book, and there's 14 different colleges. Page 2. First of all, it's aerospace engineering, then architectural engineering. Checked the box and kind of never went back.
I have to tell you, that is very similar to how I got into architectural engineering. So, when I was when we were graduating from high school, my dad was military, so we kind of drove around a lot, or moved around a lot, and I wanted to be in California. I mean, I wanted to be a surfer. I've never surfed, but I wanted to be a surfer. And I said, I want to go to school. I wanted to get in the ocean, so I wanted to do oceanography. And my dad kind of laughed and said, yeah, you're not going to oceanography, because that's in La Jolla. You know, it's too far away. It's too expensive. He said, find a local school. Let's go to KU, find a program. What are you good at? You know, you're good at drawing. It was sketching. I was drawing a lot. I was good at building
Math
things.
and science, right?
Well, I built my own car by that time, and I was teaching computers to the high school, because it was the first computers that literally came out. And so he said, well, what about architecture? And I'm like, okay, architecture. And I got accepted to the architectural program, but I didn't have a particular calculus class done yet, so they wouldn't accept me into the Arch-E program. So I went to the dean. I actually got into the school as an architect, and then when I got in, I walked around until I found the dean and said, hey, I'm doing all the classes today. I need to get into the Arch-E program. Here's the class approved that I'm completing. And he signed it literally like right there. Here, just give me this. And he signs it while in the middle of the hallway in the architectural program school. And so I became an Arch-E at that point. And then, but lighting was something that sort of came about as well, right? That was an evolution. So what about you? What was the evolution there?
The Penn State program, similar to the other ones, it's a 5-year program. So the first 2 years are very broad-based. There's architectural studio classes. There's a lot of math and science, which is kind of the boring part. But going back to it, it's, they want you to learn how to solve problems, which is great. We like the design classes, and then the introduction to lighting came. And at that time, Penn State had what was called environmental design, which was lighting, heating and air conditioning, and acoustics. They had structural, and then they had something called construction management, which they still have. And we ended up, because I started in a summer session, ended up with 2 of those majors, the structural and the environmental. And even my first job offer out of school, I was going to go into mechanical engineering. Yes, I liked lighting, but it was just, I liked all of it. I could be just as happy doing structural engineering. And then I kind of got coerced into lighting because, and this is how bad our educational process is, I spent a couple of summers working for an architect while in college. And because I had taken one lighting class, I was their lighting expert. So I was specifying dimmers, believe it or not, back then. And, we had these huge catalogs, and, no one else knew what was in there. So I was flipping through catalogs, and I was specifying Lutron dimmers. And they had a college career fair at Penn State, and Lutron was there. And they had racks of dimmers, and this is the first time I've actually seen what I had specified. So I went over there, and I was playing with the dimmers and talking to the gentleman, Ray Scholl, who's long gone, but, asking him about the dimmers, and he decided, we needed to work for him, so kind of got coerced. So my first job was with Lutron Electronics.
Oh, really?
But it wasn't even, focused in lighting design, and it was a great opportunity. So I tell everybody, even if you're design, don't downplay manufacturing, don't downplay sales. You can learn something from all of these things and try to, be the sponge and do the best. And even in sales, you can be real creative by how you try to, sell your products and things. And then at that point, my wife, or she wasn't my wife quite then, got transferred to California, and that's when I transitioned to Grinaud Associates, who had an office in Philly and an office in LA. So the deal was, to work in the LA office, but I was going to do during our, while we weren't married yet, work in the Philadelphia office and then transfer out. So it was really kind of a strange way that I got into lighting, loved it, and probably the best thing was getting out here, in the mid-'80s, working directly for Ray Grinaud, who was great friends with Leslie Wheel, and kind of, got kept under their wings and really mentored by both of them. Ray sometimes what not to do, Leslie, really pushing people and things. And it's just a great opportunity. And then in '92 ended up buying out the LA office. So Lee still is existing in Philadelphia with Grinaud Waldron and things. But that's kind of our whole story. Pretty short and simple.
So you mentioned Leslie Wheel, and you talk about sort of this history of sort of the evolution of lighting design as a service. I've noticed it, you've noticed it, but you seem to be really well connected to the sort of the education program through IES. You're really, you bring out the emerging professionals program. You're very active in that. What is your thought process in that? Why does that seem so important to you?
Well, I mean, the problem we need is from an employer, and this sounds very selfish, but I'll be blunt. I mean, one of the reasons to get involved is to make sure we have the next, I'm going to say, grouping of students or young employees to pick and choose from and things. Now, that's not really why I do it. You have to be passionate about it, and I love teaching. I love to see people that have a passion for lighting reach out, learn, listen, and want to kind of grow. But I'm also very concerned. I don't know that we have the quantity to keep filling the bucket. The architectural engineers are under such demand. They're getting, picked off for, going into manufacturing, into engineering, into lighting design, into sales, into manufacturing again. So, there's a huge, huge drain on them, and there's just not enough students. And as lighting design grows, we need better talent. And whether or not it's all the universities, we're even really happy with some of the second tier, I'm going to call it interior design programs that may not teach a full lighting degree, but they get 1 or 2 courses. And you get a student out of there that's really passionate about lighting. We can teach them the engineering side of things. What we really want is the desire to learn and to grow. And whether they stay with us for 2 years or hopefully 20 years, I think you'll meet Kelly, our partner. She started right out of KU, and now is taking over the company. Mm-hmm. So to us, it's to reach out to help all these other things. It can be fun. It's definitely rewarding, but more importantly, it's right for the industry. Kind of like how Ray and Leslie did it for me, I'm basically doing the same payback for everybody else.
And I really appreciate that. That is a very good point, is that you're paying it forward. And I think we were touching base in our conversation before we were starting recording, was literally this whole idea of passing it forward and you've got 20 years of experience. How do you bring that into the next generation? And I think, having the program that the IES has with the emerging professionals is a perfect program for that. I just find it very interesting that it's something that you do as a person. You're not actively doing that as the IES. You're actively doing that as Chip Israel, who has a lot of history in the industry. So I really appreciate that.
Well, it's selfish. It's rewarding to do it. And all I say to the universities and all the programs, all you have to do is to ask. In other words, come teach a class, come provide a critique on their final project. We want to send students to Light Fair or something like that. You ask, and if we can't do it personally, we probably know that who can connect dots together and make those types of programs really work and things. And as I said, there's sometimes a big disconnect between the needs of the teachers or the instructors, the needs of the students, and what the industry can offer. And I'm not alone in doing this. You have wonderful people in the lighting industry, and that's what makes lighting so great to me. I'm going to call it the community of lighting. Like we're doing.
Oh yeah, once you get in, it's hard to get out. I mean,
Right.
you might find other areas that you're more interested in. But once you get in the lighting industry, it's really hard to get out of the lighting industry. It's kind of like the mob, right? You're not coming, you're not leaving.
Well, hopefully not quite like the mob.
Well,
but
you know what I mean. It's just fun because I think, you seem to, when I go to Light Fair, it's like a big family reunion. It's like who I'm seeing in 10 years here, and you can't walk down. I know this is the case for you. You can't walk down any of those aisles without, every 10 yards getting interrupted. So.
Right.
It's just I think that's the beauty of the industry. Everyone knows each other.
And I think we have to be really careful as designers. You don't want to come off elitist. I know going to the local IES product fair, a rep will come up and say, well, thank you for coming. And I'm like, no, this is our job. We have to learn about the product that's out there. So we never want to be kind of divided between that. And sometimes the battles between the sales teams or the representatives and, it's our side versus their side. We all need to work together. and we have one thing in common, and that's to serve our clients. Okay, make sure they get the best quality lighting for what they want to pay for it and things. And we need to continue to work towards that, because there's a lot of questions about packaging and all this value engineering things, but really it's about how do we make better environments for our people and make our clients are super happy at the end of the project.
And so you meet a lot of students. What is a go-to piece of advice that you give to young people that are interested in lighting in the industry somewhere along the way, whether they're interior designer? What kind of advice do you like to give these guys?
I think that really there's two that really come off the top. And if you remember way back, we had someone, Julia Rezick, a wonderful designer that worked for us. Her husband was Ron Rezick. So if you know Ron, on Baywatch, those little, the life guard saving tubes, or I guess life preservers is what I would call them and stuff. He designed those because he was on the beach and saw, lifeguards trying to swim with the old big donut types of things, and it didn't really work. But he was a real brilliant designer, and he said something to me, we spent a lot of time, and said, nothing's new. You can't design anything that hasn't been really done before. And he really talked about your whole life is collecting images. And he said an old carousel slide projector. And basically, just by being aware, by acknowledging, going in and looking, you basically create this whole catalog of images so that when these design opportunities come up, automatically your brain starts to meld those together and actually create the new solution. So I'm not saying copy any of those old images you've seen, but be aware. So if you go into a restaurant or let's say a bar, do you ever sit down and say, what do I like about this bar? What do I don't like? And consciously start to pick it apart, so the next time you design a bar, you could do it. So our first thing we say to designers, and I don't care if they're interior, architectural, lighting, it doesn't really matter, is just really be aware and go in to evaluate their spaces. And then secondly is to get involved. You've talked about the IES, the IALD, the ILD Trust, and by spending time, you're investing in your future. But you get rewarded, and I say for every hour I volunteer, I get more of that time back. But now it's just great, because whether or not it's on executive types of boards or on, I'm going to call it task-oriented boards, the IES committees, you learn so much. You learn how to work with other people. You learn technical lighting that you might not have understood. And it can be very intimidating for young people, but by getting involved, and if I can share one other kind of story, yesterday our whole firm were involved on this, I'm going to call it top secret, but a project, let's say in the Middle East, and it's all about, a lighting zone 0, or kind of like a national park, so it's a preserve, and there's a hotel in the middle. So we're in this big battle between how much light do you need to see, and in this case, the metrics that we typically have, which is foot candles or lumens falling on a table, really doesn't make sense for how our eye sees underneath these lighting conditions.
Yeah.
So we're trying to educate that client, and I have students, and it's kind of like, I like to say, I'm the parent, they never listen to me because they're the kids and things. So this is how, why getting involved is really, really important. So I feel like I've grown up with the Randy Burkett's, the, Barbara Horton, Stephen Lee's, Al Borden's, Nancy Clanton, Naomi Miller, Jim Benya, and we work with all of them on different types of code committees and other things. Well, because we were kind of under this impasse, so I basically asked Nancy Clanton to say, can we, borrow some of your time? Talk to my students, my employees, about this issue. And basically, she repeated everything I said, but they believed her, not me, and things. But what is the great thing about it is she would jump on the phone and spend an hour with her competitor's firm. And the same way we would do it for anybody else's firm to kind of help them out. And it's really not about what's in the big handbooks. It's about pushing lighting design. Metrics are important as long as we create safe environments. But to me, by getting involved, that these people we've known for literally the last 30 years, they're not only competitors, they're our best friends. and I would do anything for them. And it's just a story from yesterday of, you know, what they would do for us. So I basically say, be aware and get involved. It's the best thing you can do for your career, wherever it goes.
I'm trying to think of how that would parlay to someone that's later in their career. So that's a great advice, perfect for advice for someone getting into the industry. What about someone who, you know, is maybe mid-career or later in their career? What kind of advice? I mean, I would say, you know, you are the sage of the lighting industry, because I think people ask you all kinds of questions because of, you know, your past experience as presidents and all the activity that you do in the industry. So
they ask. I don't know that they believe me. No.
Yeah, they ask.
Well,
So
let's
pretend
lighting,
like they'll listen.
well, but lighting is incredible. Our industry has evolved faster than any other building industry. I mean, they pretty much build buildings the same way that they did 200 years ago.
Right.
Okay, and yes, they can talk about 3D printing and maybe the future of how things might get done. But think about lighting. You know, it's gone through these huge transformations. I remember the first MR16s out here, Warren Carp and, you know, Capri lighting, and we had fixtures and sockets melting and all this, but it was cool and cute. And then, you know, the evolution of compact fluorescence, the blinking, the turning green, you know, the real negatives that happened. And then,
Flicker.
right,
Yeah.
all the bads. We had great fluorescent technologies, and they were actually very, very efficient. And then the color temperatures really got to where we want them, and the color rendition even better at that point, because I remember we had to mix sources to get good colors.
They were horrible in the beginning.
Right. Metal halides, shifting to, I'm going to call it the master color metal halide. So, you know, every little bridge started getting better and better. Then we had LEDs to control.
Changed everything.
Right. The addition of controls and the LED sources kind of redesigned our whole market. So now size isn't a factor. We can design things that are tiny and long, round, square, whatever you want. And basically it's made us relearn everything.
It has.
CRI doesn't count anymore.
And I love all of that. I love the fact that from a lighting perspective, you can do whatever you want in the space. You know, you get a project and they say, we don't want any downlights in the whole house.
Right.
Well, that's actually doable.
Right.
You know, we got to work it out.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting when you see sort of the evolution of the technology where you can put it anywhere. Heat isn't as much of an issue, and it controls color, being able to control everything about the color. I think that's, if you're not able to control the color of your product as a manufacturer, then it's going to be hard for you to be specified in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
You have to be able to.
And there was a learning curve, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of bad LEDs that first came out. In fact, California set up what was called JA8, the bane of many manufacturers, because they didn't want the same poor quality that really happened with compact fluorescence, the early adoption to a revolt against them because the technology wasn't there.
There were so many throwaway LEDs that you just, you know, it was supposed to last 10 years and it lasts a year.
Right. But right now, really, the good to the great manufacturers, performance of the LEDs really isn't an issue. Yes, you can kind of get between 2 macadam ellipses and those things. So that's why we're involved, you know, as a chair to basically, I'll be honest with you, to eliminate JA8.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be there, and what it's doing is keeping some very creative or unique manufacturers from coming into the California. And it's kind of like, you know, buying lacquer paint. I can go to Arizona and I get it, or the cost of a light bulb or a lamp is 3 times the cost here because of the JA8 certification. So we want to make the codes better, and we also want to always keep the quality there too, and that's getting involved and taking some time to make sure that our voices as designers and end users are heard all the way up the chain in California.
So when you talk about design from a sort of trying to keep up, right? You know, it's, like you said, it's always moving forward. There tends to be trends in the industry. We just talked about, you know, the evolution of the sort of the technology of the light source.
Right.
What other trends do you see as a lighting designer, maybe through your interior designers or maybe through your architects? What kind of trends are you seeing in the industry right now that is informing, going.
The trends are various. I mean, sometimes interior designers, right after HD, the newest materials that are on there are the next thing get introduced into the next series of hotels and things. And that's fine. Everybody wants to kind of be transformational. But I also see the internet both as a great savings of time, but also a disruptor. An example is people are kind of shopping through some of these lighting websites, coming up with lighting images, not knowing anything about the scale of them, how the light comes out of them, and they say, I want to use this on my project. Well, that's great, but the reality is it might not be appropriate for that. In other words, something that creates a very tight spot, you probably don't want in an open office plan, but yet it looks cool. So I think we really have to remember about the quality of design and the visual process, because LEDs basically now can become so bright you can light up a whole office with very few fixtures, but are you taking into account shadowing or my position to the desk? And I've seen too many times, lights put behind the person so you get a big shadow. Or one simple thing is, think about the desk as a mirror. And if I can look down and see a light in it, that's probably bad because we get veiling reflections. And while everybody's focusing on about computer screens, I think we really have to think about all the other visual tasks, including, can I see the person across the desk from me so that we can communicate and I can hear them better because I can actually see their facial expressions.
This leads me to another question about sort of light levels that I remember having issues. I think you and I spoke about this probably a year ago, and Nancy Clanton was getting involved as well. But a lot of the codes that have been dictated, particularly through Title 24, has really been about saving energy, right? It's about having to not have to build another power plant. Right. And as a result, what people have done to sort of allow that to happen is they come in and they say, okay, how much light do you need for an office space? And they go and they say, okay, well, originally it was done through evaluation. Like people would spend time and they would spend time in different rooms, and it was an actual scientific method to determine what light levels were required. And the light level that was required was 100 foot candles 50 years ago.
Or even 300.
Or even 300 foot candles, right? And so now California has come and said, oh, well, what do you really need? You only need 50 foot candles. And reality is that we're moving ourselves back in from sort of a mesooptic light level, and we're not getting the benefit of being in a bright space and not the benefit of being in a dark space. And we recognize that that's not a human solution anymore. Right. Where are you at as far as actively participating in that process?
Well, I think we all have to become educated ourselves. And so as we're learning more and more through research, and there's symposiums where they bring together all these people doing research, whether it's under the IES or international types of groups, and to learn what's going on there. And the idea is we now have sources that can blend colors and create from very warm tones to very cool tones. That's great. My whole thing is, why don't we put in a window? Why don't we start by designing architecture better so that we can bring in the light without the glare or without the heat, so we're not as dependent upon the electric light sources to fix bad architecture. So I think that's where we have to start, okay? And then a lot of that is with the educational aspect. So it's using technology to fix bad designs. So that's just one way. It's just like, we're learning so much about the office space, and now with COVID and whether people are coming back and is open office space the good things.
Or even, should they even be there? That's a question.
Well, we don't have enough time to talk about that, but this whole idea of light fixtures adds sound absorbency, so you can have a polished concrete floor, concrete ceilings, glass walls on both sides, and you think two linear fixtures with fuzzy material is going to solve your acoustic problems. No, it's basically, I don't want to say just a marketing gimmick, but the reality is it can help, but it won't solve those types of problems. So, but this is great, right? And you think
you can actually hear if there was an air compressor going on, you wouldn't even be able to hear it. So it's been helpful.
Right. and I think that once again, it is a nice design feature, but it doesn't solve all those problems. So what I'd really like to go back is, what is good design? And I think that we really have to think about maybe the bad side of LEDs. I think when you look at the 80s, we had a lot of task lighting or visual tasks. In other words, writing on paper, reading books and manuscripts and whatever it may be. Then it went to the cathode ray tube, right, the computer screen. Then it was about glare on the screen. So all of a sudden now, white lens fluorescent fixtures became paracubes and deep parabolics. Then came indirect lighting because we were solving the glare on the computer screen. Then comes along LEDs, and what do? The first generation, they shoved them in white boxes with white lenses again. So we've gone back and we lost 40 years of knowledge on how to control glare into the spaces. And now for linear fixtures, we went from 6-inch boxes. Why? Because the fluorescent lamp fit in there and the manufacturers were using the same ones. Well, now we can get them to be 1 inch wide. And we can get 1,000 lumens a foot, or even sometimes 2,000. And now that those types of real cool things that look nice on the plans, we're finding out 2 things. One is spaces are over-designed because they're laying out the lighting in a graphic pattern. And I'll give you an example. I think it's United Terminal here. Hopefully you didn't do it, but the reality of it is I went through there in the concourse, a walking space, and I measured it. I'm the geek with the light meter, but it had 70 foot candles in a concourse space. Okay, and why? Because it was the layout of the pattern. But more importantly, in a lot of these office spaces, we're finally getting comments back from interior designers that, yeah, we've done a lot of these linear lights, and the people in the spaces really don't like them. Why? Because they're becoming glary, or they've always been glaring, but now people are acknowledging that. So we really have to go back to the quality of the spaces for the people, because we're designing these for the humans inside of them, right? It's not about energy codes. And I'll just finish up by answering
Thank
your
goodness.
last.
I love that.
California has won, let me put it this way. From mid-'80s when Title 24 started to now, we're using 95% light or 95% less energy than we did for roughly the same illumination levels.
Yeah.
And actually the utilities and the California Energy Commission is realizing we're not going to get a whole lot more improvement out of that. So they're not going to look at lighting. They're going to look at monitors and HVAC. That's where the savings will be, plug loads and those things. Maybe controls, if they're reliable and cost effective, are maybe another opportunity. But I think you're going to start to see the really push for lowering of lighting power densities to really kind of taper off. Because, you know, even if you turn off, you know, you got a little bollard here, you know, it's 2 watts.
Yeah.
You dim it 50% after hours, what are you saving? You know, you'll never get the payback on the control system in order to recoup your costs and things. So, as I said, we're winning those battles, but it takes a lot of the industry to stand up and say, no, it's got to be cost effective, or these are examples and we really can't lower those limits anymore.
And we can't look at it from, you know, a cost anymore. We got to look at it as what's good for the human eye, what's good for the human brain, and, you know, and it's always time associated, right? When is this space being used?
Right.
And we should be allowed to use the light level that is needed for a time frame, such as a school, where you walk in, it should be bright in there. It needs to be as bright as possible. And we shouldn't have to be, you know, restricted by an energy code just simply because, you know, we're trying to save money. What's the right thing to do? What's the right light levels?
And I think people are learning with the wellness, but you have people selling technologies too. And for example, the combination of the white tuning light sources and the energy codes, we can change and we can match the illumination, I'm going to call it color temperatures, to be evocative of outdoors, to match daylight. But because of the energy codes, we can never match the intensity of the light. So even though we're going from warm to cool to warm, but at 30 foot candles, those intensities on the back of your eye and the retina, they basically aren't enough to do all of the things that they talk about. That's why we really say, go outside and walk around the block once, or put in a window or get in skylights, whatever it takes, because then we can get higher light levels and actually really affect the wellness of the people in those spaces.
That's great. Perfect. Greatly said. Thank you. So you have been in the industry for quite some time, both of us, right? I mean, it's over 20 for the both of us. My wife and I have been married for 30 years
You
now.
should know this, not me. No.
Yeah. So it's really well over almost 30, 35 years probably for you. Is there a project, this is kind of the questions I kind of like to ask because it gets into knowing the kind of work that you've done. What's a project out of the 30 years in the industry that sort of sticks out in your mind of one project? What's one that sticks out?
Oh, as successful or not?
Yeah, good stories. Like I like stories. So
I think that they've all been amazing, and normally I like to say it's the next project because we're to the point where a lot of our friends are retiring, both architects, interior designers, but more and so lighting designers, and there's going to be a big vacuum that has to fill, especially when some of these other people step away, and we've already lost a lot of people from retirement in just the last year. So it's really tough question to answer. What I would really say is there's some that stick out in my mind. So when I was at Grunwald Associates, I was able to work on the Oval Office of the White House. Okay,
very cool.
Can't say it, can't put it on our
websites
or whatever, but just to see the process or the bureaucracy as well as the design and how that really affected things. So
what was that like?
It was actually great. I was working with Ray at that point, but I mean it was relatively simple technology because it's an oval room with an oval cube, and for the old people out there, 39 watt biax lamps, but with special Lutron high lume dimming way back then, made the technology brighter, and that was some of the problems originally. The original sources weren't that bright, and then literally at that time President Reagan was older. We all know the older you are, the more lights you may need to see correctly and things. So just by building up the illumination levels to where it was actually performing was actually a huge success and things. One of the most challenging and one of the original projects as a designer was Disney's Wilderness Lodge. It was actually our second Disney hotel.
The one in Anaheim?
No, this is the one in Florida.
Florida, okay.
So California Adventures we've done like 15 of them so far. But it was the most amazing project because it pushed everything to the real limits, and it was so exciting. It's like you would fly to Florida, and on the whole plane back you're drawing up sketches of custom fixtures, and it's really tough because when you look at a Frank Lloyd Wright designed everything in the house, from the house to the windows to the furniture to the silverware.
And
and
everything.
This job had 30 consultants. Okay, so now you're spread across the country, but the amount of effort that the logo that would be on the menu at the restaurant was in the millwork on the reception desk, that was in the custom light details in there, down to the louvers of the air conditioning vent. So it was so seamless that it was like one person designed it. And probably the greatest reason I like it, that was 90s. So 30 years later, they haven't changed a thing. And yet that's pretty unheard of. Every 10 years, most of the time, they're ripping out and starting all over. So it really is kind of one of those timeless designs. And then there's just been wonderful things. That's the best part about lighting. You don't want to downplay architecture, but you get once in a lifetime commission as architects, that grand job, or maybe every decade. We've been fortunate we get one of those every year, whether it's a Venetian casino that's led to 50 other casinos since then, or a house in India that's 27 stories tall and $1 billion. Those are just really fortunate things that just put that together, and that's why I love what we're doing, because I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow. There's going to be something totally different that we've never done, and that's what makes it fun and challenging. So.
That's what I love about lighting. I tell people that all the time, is that particularly in the manufacturing as well, is that this product, as a custom manufacturer, there's nothing that comes to the door that's always the same.
Right.
And it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me constantly learning new technologies and new ways to do things.
Right.
And when we say design, build, ascend, that's the idea is that we're designing things, we have to build, but then we learn from them. And then each time we're progressing forward and upward. So the ascension is always the goal to be better.
It's the refinement and stuff, and the evolution, and as I said, that's what really makes it challenging, as well as rewarding, because when they turn out great, you can feel pride, and it's nothing like taking your family or friends to jobs that you've done, especially 20 years later, and they look exactly the same. I was at Pacific City and Huntington Beach, a job that Matt Bates and myself did. And I was just looking at it last night. I'm like, it looks exactly the same way we did it probably 8 years ago, when that was early LED technologies and hiding light sources. And the basic principles of lighting haven't changed, but the way we can integrate them really has changed. So.
That does remind me. I'm going to do two more things with you, and then we're going to wrap this up. Okay. So, because we're going to do this regularly, hopefully. He's close enough, and you live in Huntington Beach. We're nearby. I'm going to steal you away, and we'll do these things. We'll talk about things. But one is I wanted you to do a quick product review of something that's on the table, and so you can pick something here, and we'll talk about it.
This is a microphone.
Just off the cuff, right?
Okay.
And then the other one I wanted to bring up, which was where you think the manufacturing of custom products can go and make your job easier going forward. So let's grab something off the table here. That's a little.
Are these finished products, or these are just pieces parts?
Well, that's a finished product.
Well, this is, but
that's part of our.
Oh, it's heavy. I thought it was a piece of cardboard. So okay.
That was part of our. I don't know if you saw it, but we did a double helix for GSK.
Okay.
GSK has a facility out in Philadelphia, and that's part of an 80-foot long fixture that runs through one of their lobbies, and that was a mock-up that we did for them. So it's got lights on LEDs on both sides.
How can I pick one? But I guess to me, and being very hands-on, is the idea of taking something from a sketch and making it real. And I remember doing a fixture that we thought would be real simple for kind of an oval-shaped table, but it wasn't exactly an oval, and wanted a light fixture, and learning about double compound curves. And,
right.
And until you start getting dirty and playing with your hands, it's amazing to draw something, but it's really the craftsmanship to take that into three-dimensional. So, I mean, this is pretty amazing when I look at it, that once again, it's formed in two different axes so that it literally becomes three-dimensional. And I know it's just kind of a mock-up, but to me, the integration, how, I'm assuming this is a stem or a holder or whatever, but it's concealed, so you don't seal. Sorry, I'm breaking your mock-up.
Nope.
But the elimination of, how it's attached. So those are the important things as a designer, because if you don't work with a great manufacturer, and if you don't say all concealments, or all attachments must be concealed, there's one way you can tap it and screw it through, but then you got to grind it and polish it all down and then paint it, or it's done with studs that are welded on. So I'd really challenge the young people to get involved, come to places like this where you can pick the things up and see how they go. It's going to add to your creativity. And then the fact that, it could be direct, indirect, you can just see kind of the quality of this. And the bigger thing I'm trying to figure out is, how they run the wires too, so if they come down and split through there.
I'll share with you after this, and I'll be able to show some imagery of the final fixture for everyone to see. But one of the things that I learned from this one, if you want to talk about the Ascension, right, sort of getting better, we found this product to be fairly easy to install, to maintain, because we had these little stainless steel clips. And this made the job a lot easier to fabricate and in the future to repair. Now, the thing is that these are somewhat noticeable at when it's lit up. You kind of see these little tick marks along the way. Right. And it wouldn't have taken us a whole bunch more money, but it would have taken us a lot more time to redesign this so that this clip was smaller and narrower and clamped behind it. So when you push it in, the clip is actually behind the fixture, and you don't actually see it. It's totally concealed. Right. And I think if we were to do this over again, we would have allocated some more design time to this actual piece. Yeah. But what was fun about this job was we had to scale a rendering from an interior designer. So the designer says, this is what we want, and it shows this glowing tight double helix through this space, floating through this. through a three-story space. And we took a scale to that rendering. It was like, that thing's 3 to 4 inches wide. How do we get something to glow that's 3 to 4 inches wide without it weighing a ton and being, bulky and unwieldy? So what we wanted to do was to say, okay, let's paint this a white so that when this white hits this white, it molds and melds into one color.
Right.
And so from a distance, this looks like it's glowing.
Right.
This whole distance, this whole width.
Right.
And it worked,
Without clunky edges and things.
and it
right?
worked beautifully. It's one of those things where you would think that this whole thing would need to glow, but it doesn't. Just this part needs to glow, and your eye
Right.
makes up this whole thing, the rest of it for you. So that was
Right.
what a great evaluation. Thank you.
Right. Well, and you asked the other question about, custom manufacturers, and, there's not many left, I'd like to say, and things. So the real key is, I think, limits the designers, because when we're challenged that an architect says you can't do something, we're like, no, let's figure out how to do it. And not only is it making big, beautiful sculptural things, sometimes it's just a different mounting bracket, or I think right now you're doing extended stems for us on something. So it's not glamorous, but it fits the needs of the project, and there are not many that are out there. Like I said, I need a special glare shield. Why? Because I don't want to look into these light sources, and to have a place that people just come to and that can use that as a resource, I think that's a huge benefit to people that are out there. And it's great you're here local to us, but throughout the country and around the world, there's very few craftsmen that are left that understand what we're trying to achieve with these things. Sometimes they're expensive fixtures, sometimes they're just very inexpensive, but they fit the needs. So, you should have a good future. There's a lot of need, so.
Well, I appreciate the sentiment, and we enjoy what we do, and I think we both enjoy the lighting industry. So I think, I was teaching for a while before I had kids, and I would drive into LA and teach at FITM for the lighting program there, which was just me, but it was for interior designers, and I wanted to get back to that someday. It's just that my desire to educate and spend time has really been with my own kids and my employees, and so teaching, I think, is something that you dabble a little bit in, but it's not like you have a plan to do education like as a second career, or are you thinking of doing something like that when you're done?
I never thought about it too much. I thought my second career was going to be a giant sailboat someplace, far, far away from y'all. No, I think I did teach at UCLA Extensions, I think, for like 7 years straight. And to be honest with you, I got burned out on it. And I can see what the professors kind of go through, especially if you have a full-time job. And if it's not fun anymore, you shouldn't be a professor, okay? Because then the students, maybe it's gradually, but they don't get the quality that they kind of deserve from that. So what I'd really say is, right now I love teaching in the way I do it. I'm really making a big effort to mentor and teach our employees, because while I go around the country and the world and do formal teaching or seminars, I'm like, I should start it at home. So that's where we're really having a lot of fun doing that. But it's really wonderful to go into 2 or 3 different departments, teach a portion of a class, teach a whole class, do 2 or 3 things for the Knuckles Fund. A couple times we've gone to TCU and done courses there. But it's great where you can get out and really meet the students, understand how they're going, because the students are so much more talented now. The skills that they use, and if you just look at the cold design competition here and the submissions from them, it's amazing the quality of their graphics. I mean, they're professional grade. They may not understand every lighting nuance and stuff, but it's just amazing what they can kind of bring to it. I think it's our job to continue to push the lighting side of it too. So we don't really know what our next career, will be, but I'm not ready to give up this one. I tell people, and a lot of our friends that are retiring, it's like, I just want to go from overtime to part-time at some point, but it's to me still so fascinating and a wonderful of a job. Why would we want to give up on it? I mean, we're not laying bricks and doing back-breaking work. And I shared a van with Scott Johnson, if you all know, from Johnson fame, and was in Taipei, and we're just talking. His one quote that I remember the most was, I wasn't even good until I turned 50. And we have all these young people that want to be rock stars at 25 and things, and it just takes 20 years of experience to become that overnight success and things. So It's always continually listening, learning, looking, evaluating things, and you get better and better. Now we want to apply all of that and share it all.
Yeah, and I love that you want to continue that evolution and see the next generation come in, because we need more people like you and to doing that. So I appreciate you.
I don't know about that, but no, it's
No,
great. So.
Well, I think that wraps up our podcast here today, and we'll have more with Chip Israel and Lighting Design Alliance. Hopefully we'll get Kelly in here next week. Actually, I think she's already responded with a new date, since we couldn't get her in this time. She was.
I'm sure she'll correct me then. No.
But again, thank you for your time, and now I'll just take you a quick tour of showing you that fixture in live, lit up, and everything else.
We'd love to see it.
Money breaking in the door with provocative